The scarlet tunics were already in crates before anyone thought to ask why. Not stored, not transferred, crated, the kind of stacking that happens when someone has decided a thing is finished and wants the decision made physical before anyone can object. 43 tunics, brass buttons still fastened, folded with the mechanical efficiency of people who had been told this was routine. Thomas Finch found them on a Wednesday morning in October, in the third sub-basement storeroom of the Palace Annex, behind a rack of ceremonial horse blankets that hadn't been moved since the Diamond Jubilee. He was 23 years old, 8 months into his apprenticeship with the Regimental Tailoring Division, and he had been sent down to retrieve a box of spare collar stays. He almost walked past them. The crates were plain wood, stenciled with a Ministry of Defense logistics code and a single word: surplus. Nothing else. No regimental identifier, no date of origin, no destination address. Just that one word doing the work of a decision nobody wanted to put their name to. Finch set down his torch and crouched beside the nearest crate. The lid had been fitted but not yet sealed. He lifted it with both hands, the way you lift something when you already suspect what's inside and want to be wrong about it. Scarlet wool, dense and dark as dried blood, folded over itself in careful layers. He reached in and turned back the top fold. Brass buttons caught his torchlight, and not generic brass. These were regimental buttons, each one stamped with the Coldstream star, the same pattern he'd spent 6 weeks learning to distinguish from the buttons of the Grenadiers, the Welsh Guards, the Irish. He counted the crates, 43. He stood there for a long moment in the basement silence, torchlight moving across the stenciled word surplus, and then he took out his phone and scrolled to a number he'd been told was for administrative queries only, emergencies being something else entirely. He called it anyway. The phone rang 4 times, then a voice clipped in awake despite the early hour. Voss. Finch said, "I think someone is throwing away the scarlet tunics. The Coldstream ones, all of them." A pause, not a long one. "Don't touch anything else. Don't let anyone into that room. I'll be there in 40 minutes. She was there in 32. Sergeant Major Alina Voss had spent 34 years in the Household Division before the paperwork caught up with her knees, and her commanding officer had, with visible relief on both sides, reassigned her to regimental records. She was 56. Gray-haired in the practical way of someone who had stopped thinking about it, and she moved through the Palace Annex's service corridors with the unhurried certainty of a person who had been in worse basements than this one. Finch was waiting outside the storeroom door. He had done exactly what she'd told him, stood his ground, turned away 2 maintenance workers who'd come to begin sealing the crates, told them there was a cataloging discrepancy that needed clearing up first. He'd said it in the tone she would later recognize as instinctively correct, not aggressive, not apologetic, just the flat administrative confidence of someone who expects to be believed. She gave him a single nod of approval and went inside. The torchlight was unnecessary now. She'd found the light switch on her way in, and the storeroom revealed itself as a low-ceilinged room of stone and old brick, shelving units along 3 walls. The crates arranged in 2 rows down the center with the precision of a job that had been thought about in advance. Someone had measured the available floor space. Someone had ordered exactly the right number of crates. This had not been improvised. Voss moved along the first row, reading the logistics stenciling on each lid. The ministry code was the same on every crate, a disposal batch number she didn't recognize. She photographed it with her phone. Then she opened the nearest crate the way Finch had, two-handed, and looked inside. The tunics were in exceptional condition. That was the thing that stopped her for a moment. These had not been pulled from active rotation because they were worn out. The wool was sound, the seams intact, the brass undulled beneath a thin film of storage dust. Someone had decided to dispose of things that were not broken. In her experience, that was never about cost. She checked the second crate, third. each one the same Coldstream pattern regimental buttons, parade-grade condition. Then in the fourth crate beneath 3 folded tunics, her fingers found a document wallet, the kind used for internal ministry transfers. Inside was a single sheet, a disposal authorization, signed at the bottom in a small, precise hand. R. Aldridge, Deputy Director, Ceremonial Affairs Review, Ministry of Defense. Voss held the sheet in the basement light and read it twice. The language was immaculate, passive voice throughout. No active agent, no stated rationale beyond operational rationalization of non-essential ceremonial inventory. It could have been written about obsolete filing cabinets. She knew the name Aldridge. She had known it for 3 years, since a similar order had quietly decommissioned the mounted drum horses' ceremonial silver harnesses, a decision that had been reversed only after a retired brigadier happened to mention it at a regimental dinner, and the resulting conversation had reached the right ears within a week. Before that, an earlier Aldridge signature had appeared on a document reclassifying the state trumpeter's fanfare arrangements as non-obligatory performance guidelines. Each time the same handwriting, each time the same passive language, each time something old and specific and irreplaceable moved one step closer to disappearing. She folded the document and put it in her jacket pocket. "Finch," she called toward the door. He appeared immediately. "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Find me the regimental archive access log for the last 90 days, and then find out who signed the movement order that brought these crates down here." "Yes, Sergeant Major." "And get yourself a proper torch. That phone light is going to give you eye strain." The Ministry of Defense building on Whitehall operates on the principle that its corridors should feel, at all times, like the antechamber to a decision that has already been made. The carpets are the color of old authority. The signage is understated. The security staff have the particular expression of people who have seen everyone from prime ministers to protesters, and have learned that neither category requires much in the way of visible reaction. Voss arrived the following morning without an appointment. She had considered making one. She had decided against it on the grounds that a man who signs disposal orders without regimental consultation probably schedules his meetings with similar unilateral efficiency. And she preferred to conduct this conversation on her own timing rather than his. The receptionist outside Aldridge's office was young, efficient, and trained to deflect. Voss gave her name, her rank, and her regimental records division identifier, and said she was there regarding a heritage protection query related to an active disposal batch. She said it in the same tone Finch had used in the storeroom, flat, administrative, expecting to be believed. She was shown in within 4 minutes. Richard Aldridge was in his mid-50s, lean in the way of someone who eats at his desk, with the careful tidiness of a man who considers visible order to be a form of argument. His office had no photographs, no personal objects, nothing on the walls except 2 framed organizational charts and a single printed motto: "Efficiency is respect for what matters." He stood when she entered, which she had not expected, and gestured to the chair across from his desk, with the practiced courtesy of someone who has learned that good manners are a useful buffer against difficult conversations. "Sergeant Major Voss," he said, "I understand this is about a disposal batch." "Batch number MDE4471C, she said. 43 Coldstream Guards scarlet tunics, currently crated in Palace Annex Subbasement 3. Disposal authorized under your signature, dated the 14th of this month." He nodded, unhurried. "That's correct. The review process identified a significant inventory surplus of non-operational ceremonial items. The scarlet tunics in question haven't been in active rotation since the regiment returned from the last operational deployment and resumed ceremonial duties," Voss said, "which is precisely when they should be in active rotation." Aldridge settled back slightly. The cost of maintaining, cleaning and storing parade-grade wool at heritage preservation standard is considerable. The public ceremonial function of the household division is fully met by the existing operational inventory. The scarlet tunics represent a duplication of resource that. They represent the reinstatement, Voss said. A small pause. I'm sorry. The reinstatement of the scarlet uniform after wartime khaki. The decision to bring the scarlet back wasn't administrative. It was regimental. It was a specific, deliberate act with a specific meaning, and it was recorded. She placed the photographed document on his desk, the disposal order, face up. I'd like to see the regimental consultation record that preceded this signature. The tidiness of his expression remained intact. The review process followed standard ministerial protocol. Regimental consultation is required for operational changes. Ceremonial inventory rationalization falls under. I'd like to see the consultation record, she said again. Same tone, same pace. The silence that followed was of the particular quality that occurs when someone has expected a conversation to go one way and is recalibrating. The 1919 reinstatement order, Voss continued. The original regimental document. I'd like you to produce it because if you've reviewed it as part of this process, it will be in your file. Aldridge's hands were still on his desk. I'm not aware of a 1919 document of that description. Then we have a problem, Voss said, because it exists. She stood, collected the disposal order photograph, and left without waiting to be dismissed. In the corridor outside, she called Finch. Meet me at the archive, she said, and bring the access log. The Household Division Regimental Archive occupied 3 rooms on the upper floor of a building in Chelsea that had been, at various points in its history, a private residence, a wartime requisition, and a regimental officer's mess. The archive itself had been here since 1923, which meant it had outlasted 4 refurbishments, 2 floods, and 1 direct conversation with a member of the royal family who had wanted a particular document removed and had been politely declined. The archivist, a retired warrant officer named David Carroll, had worked here for 19 years and treated the archive with the specific combination of academic precision and protective instinct, usually associated with people who have spent a long time guarding something irreplaceable. He met Voss and Finch at the door with a set of keys and the expression of a man who had been expecting this visit since Tuesday. The 1919 Coldstream file, Voss said. I know, Carroll said. Come in. The room was warm and dry in the particular way of properly maintained archives, temperature-controlled, low humidity. The faint mineral smell of old paper kept in better conditions than most people's most important documents. Carroll led them to the 3rd room, to a filing unit along the east wall, and withdrew a flat archival box with the care of someone who has done this motion 10,000 times and intends to do it 10,000 more. Inside, beneath a sheet of acid-free tissue, lay a document folder. Carroll opened it on the reading table and stood back. The paper was the color of weak tea, the edges crisp from decades of careful storage. The handwriting was the formal copperplate of a man who had learned to write in the 19th century and saw no reason to change, dense, upright, completely legible. Regimental Order Number 7, it read across the top, in ink that had faded from black to a deep, steady brown. Dated the 9th of March, 1919. Issued by Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore, Commanding Officer, 1st Battalion Coldstream Guards. Finch leaned in. Voss read aloud, quietly, the way you read something that deserves to be heard. The order was 3 paragraphs. The first established the date of reinstatement, the scarlet ceremonial tunic to be resumed with immediate effect upon return to home garrison. The second specified the precise uniform requirements, the buttons, the facings, the distinctions that separated this regiment from others, each detail written with the exactness of a man for whom exactness was the point. The 3rd paragraph was 12 lines long. Voss read it twice before she spoke again. It said, in the formal language of a 1919 military document, that the reinstatement of the scarlet uniform was not a return to tradition for tradition's sake. It was a declaration. The regiment had gone to war in khaki because war required invisibility, practicality, the subordination of everything individual to the collective necessity of survival. The regiment was returning from that war. The men who had survived were coming home. And the scarlet tunic was the visible, public, deliberate statement that they had done so, that this regiment existed, had endured, had brought its men back to stand on British soil in British colors in the full sight of anyone who cared to look. It was not pageantry, the order said. It was proof. Finch said nothing for a long moment. Then, he didn't know this existed. He may not have looked, Voss said. Or he looked and decided it wasn't relevant. She picked up her phone and photographed every page methodically in good light. Either answer is a problem. Caro had been standing quietly by the door. The access log, he said. Since you asked Finch to pull it, no one from the ministry has requested this file in the last 90 days, or the last 9 years. Voss looked at him. Nobody consulted the archive, Caro said. The disposal order was written without it. She put her phone in her pocket. I need to make a call, she said, somewhere quiet. Caro pointed to the reading room next door. She went in and closed the door, and Finch heard, through the wall, the sound of a number being dialed. Then Voss's voice, lower than usual, saying, Sir, I'm sorry to contact you through this channel, but I need 20 minutes of your time and I need it before Friday. A pause. Yes, sir, it's about the scarlet. Field Marshal Sir Gregory Hale had retired from active service 11 years ago at the age of 68. Following a career that had taken him from junior officer in the tail end of the Cold War through 2 Gulf deployments, a tour in the Balkans, a desk job he had accepted with visible reluctance, and a period as chief of the general staff during which he had developed a reputation for asking, in moments of institutional friction, one very specific question. What exactly are we protecting here and why? He was 79 now. He lived in Wiltshire with his wife and a garden that required more attention than most military operations. He had a telephone and used it sparingly, and when Voss's call came through on a Thursday morning, he had been reading in his study and had answered on the second ring. He arrived in London on Friday. Not with a staff car, not with an aide, not with any of the apparatus that had once accompanied his every movement. He took the train from Salisbury and arrived at Waterloo in a wax jacket and walking boots, carrying a leather briefcase that had been with him since Sandhurst, and he made his way to the ministry building on Whitehall on foot because it was 20 minutes and he preferred to think while he was moving. Voss met him in the lobby. He looked at her the way soldiers who have served long enough look at each other. A complete assessment conducted in approximately 1 second, taking in everything from posture to expression to the weight of what they're carrying that has nothing to do with the briefcase. Sergeant Major, he said, show me the document. She showed him both documents in the lobby, side by side on her phone screen, Aldridge's disposal order and the photographed pages of the 1919 regimental order. He read them without speaking, his expression doing nothing visible. Then he handed her phone back and said, Let's go upstairs. Aldridge's office received them 12 minutes later. He had been given no advance notice of Hale's identity. Voss had requested only a meeting regarding the disposal batch, and the ministry's front desk had evidently not cross-referenced the name on the visitor register with the retired field marshal's entry in the army list. The moment Aldridge saw Hale in his doorway, something shifted in the careful tidiness of his expression, not panic, but the particular recalibration of a man who has just understood that the conversation he prepared for is not the conversation he is about to have. Hale sat down without being invited to. He placed his briefcase on his knee, opened it, and removed 2 printed documents, the disposal order and the 1919 regimental order, which Voss had emailed him on Thursday and which he had printed, read 3 times, and annotated in the margins in a small, angular hand. He put them on the desk side by side and looked at Aldridge. "I have one question," he said. Aldridge waited. The 1919 order specifies the reason for the Scarlet's reinstatement in explicit terms. It is not a matter of tradition or preference. It is a regimental declaration of survival, the regiment's public statement that its men came home. Hale's voice was the voice of someone who has given orders in conditions where being clearly understood was the difference between life and its alternative. It was not loud. It did not need to be. When you authorized the disposal of those tunics, what was your understanding of what they represented? The silence in the room had the quality of a held breath. Aldridge said, carefully, "Ceremonial inventory rationalization is within the scope of." "That's not what I asked," Hale said. Another silence. "I asked what you understood those tunics to represent." Aldridge's hands were flat on his desk, a historical uniform tradition maintained at. "No," Hale said. "It was a single syllable and it landed in the room like a full stop. They are the standing proof that a regiment went to war and came back. That is not a tradition. That is a fact. And you were proposing to dispose of the evidence." He picked up the 1919 document. He looked at it for a moment, not reading it. He had already read it, simply looking at it in the way you look at something when you want the other person in the room to understand its weight. Then he put it back on the desk, picked up a pen from the cup beside Aldridge's keyboard. His own pen was in his jacket pocket, but he used Aldridge's deliberately, the small specificity of making the reversal happen with the same instrument that occupied the same space as the original decision, and signed the reversal order that Voss had prepared and placed in front of him. He capped the pen, set it down. "The tunics will be returned to active rotation," he said. "Effective immediately. The disposal batch is canceled." He looked at Aldridge one final time. "I'd recommend, going forward, that ceremonial inventory reviews include consultation with the regimental archive. The people who wrote those records knew what they were writing and why." He stood, collected his briefcase, and looked at Voss. "Is there anything else?" "No, sir," she said. "Good." He picked up his annotated copy of the 1919 document and put it back in his briefcase. The disposal order he left on Aldridge's desk, face up. He walked out. Voss followed. In the corridor, waiting for the lift, he said nothing. The lift arrived. They rode it to the ground floor. In the lobby, he shook her hand once firmly, and then he was gone, out through the glass doors and into the gray Whitehall morning, walking back toward Waterloo. Voss stood in the lobby for a moment. The security staff watched her with the same impassive attention they turned on everyone. She took out her phone and called Finch. "It's done," she said. "Go and tell Carol." The crates came back up from the basement on a Monday morning. Not with any ceremony, 2 logistics staff with a trolley, a service lift. A corridor in the palace annex that had the particular quality of spaces that exist for practical purposes and are never photographed. Finch was there because he had asked to be and nobody had said no, which in his experience was the closest the institution came to a formal invitation. The tunics were unpacked one by one and transferred to the tailoring division's care. His job for the next 2 weeks was to go through each one, inspecting the seams, checking the buttons, making the small necessary repairs of items that had been stored rather than worn, returning them to the condition that parade grade required. He did this with the methodical attention his 8 months had taught him, but also with the slower, more careful attention of someone who has recently learned what they are actually holding. The brass buttons, he now knew, were not decorative. They were not tradition for its own sake. They were the specific, deliberate choice of a commanding officer in March of 1919 who had looked at his surviving men and decided that the world needed to be able to see them, really see them, in the full color of what they were and where they had been and what they had come through. He turned one button over in his fingers. Coldstream Star, stamped in the same dye pattern since before his grandfather was born. He put it back in its proper place and continued. The parade itself happened on the second Tuesday of November. A grey morning, the kind London produces in autumn without apology, low cloud, cold without being bitter, the light flat, and even in the way that makes colors appear exactly as they are rather than enhanced by sun. Horse Guards parade in that light had the quality of an old photograph that has not faded. There was no announcement, no press call, no ceremonial program, no dignitary seating. The scarlet tunics went on as they had always gone on in the preparation rooms, with the assistance of the dressing staff, fastened with the same sequence of buttons in the same order, the same inspection, the same adjustment of bearskins, the same final check before the doors opened and the square received them. Voss stood at the edge of the parade ground. She had not worn her uniform, she was in civilian clothes, a dark coat, her hands in her pockets. She had not told anyone she was coming, she had simply come. Finch appeared beside her approximately 3 minutes before the guard changed. She had not known he would be there. She suspected Carol had told him. Neither of them spoke. The horses came first, as they always did, the drum horses moving with the vast, unhurried certainty of animals that have done this so many times that the crowd has stopped being a variable. Then the foot guards, the scarlet moving across the gray square like something lit from within, the brass buttons catching the flat November light, and returning it in the small, precise points that had been there since before anyone watching had been born. The boots on the gravel were exactly as they had always been. The commands were exactly as they had always been. Nothing about this parade was different from any other parade, except for the fact that it was happening at all, that the tunics were on and not in crates in a basement, that 43 things that had been 12 days away from the word surplus were instead here in the cold morning air doing what they had always been meant to do. Finch said very quietly, "The regiment came home." Voss didn't respond immediately. She watched the scarlet cross the square. The color was remarkable in this light, not bright, not showy, simply present, the deep red of something that does not need to announce itself. "They always do," she said. "That's the point." The guard changed with the precision of an institution that has been doing this longer than most countries have existed. The outgoing guard moved off. The new guard took its position. The square held them for a moment, scarlet against gray stone, brass against pale sky, and then the ceremony continued as it had always continued, as it would continue, because that was what it was for. Voss watched until the last of them had crossed the square. Then she turned up her collar against the November cold and walked away in the direction of the service entrance, the way she always left places where she had come to see something important. She didn't look back. The parade continued behind her, audible for another 2 minutes, boots on gravel, the distant command of the duty officer, the horses. And then the city absorbed it, as the city absorbs everything. And the square held only the guards in their scarlet and the tourists with their cameras and the gray November sky that had been there before any of them and would be there long after. In the palace annex sub-basement, the storeroom where the crates had sat was empty. Someone had already removed the surplus stencils. The shelving units stood clean and bare, waiting for whatever the institution decided to put there next, which is what institutions do. They continue, they receive. They hold things for safekeeping, and occasionally they are reminded by someone with a torch and a phone and the good sense to make a call, of exactly what they are holding and why it matters. The light switch was off, the room was dark. The tunics were upstairs in the light, where they belonged.